Welcome to tonight's Dean Speaker Series with General Tammy Smith. I'm Court Worthington, and I teach leadership in the undergraduate and MBA programs here. And I'm going to break all the rules by reading a bit more than I teach my students to. So can we start by giving a warm welcome to two people tonight, actually. It is author and lecturer Ori Brofman and General Tammy Smith. Thank you for coming. I'll introduce both of them in just a couple of minutes. So tonight's event is sponsored by three student clubs here at Haas. Q at Haas, Women in Leadership, WIL, and the Haas Veterans Club. We have an applause for them as well, the clubs that, thank you for. And along with these clubs, I also want to welcome a number of my current students from the MBA class Leadership Communication. We see some of you here. Quite a number. So there are three large themes in the room with us tonight. General Smith has been and continues to be a woman leading quite successfully in a historically male-influenced culture. Additionally, our country and our military are now, I counted it, are now 238 years old. And General Smith is the first openly gay general in U.S. military history. General Smith can share her experiences tonight with both before and after the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Outside of gender and orientation identities, General Smith can speak as a senior leader in a profession where stakes are unusually high, where ambiguity and even chaos are often prevalent, and where a leader's decisiveness is critical. So a focus of the way that we teach leadership at Haas is bringing one's true self to the position, and to the degree possible coming from a place of openness and authenticity. And that is a practice. So confidence without attitude, one of our primary principles, means being simultaneously strong and human. So I'm going to turn here and introduce each of these people, and then they'll take it away. Ori Brofman is the author of several New York Times bestseller books, including The Starfish and the Spider and The Chaos Imperative. Ori was an undergraduate here at Berkeley many years ago, where he majored in peace and conflict studies, and then almost immediately, I think he was the youngest member of his graduate class at that school, the business school down in Palo Alto, that shall remain unnameless. He headed straight there and got his MBA, and then since then he's made a career founding and catalyzing various networks for both business and social good. Ori and I are old friends, and we've done considerable work together delivering leadership training to senior Army officers. And Ori just last week became a lecturer here at Haas. We're gifted to have him. And it was his work training U.S. Army generals that led him to meeting General Smith. And I really am going to directly read this part of it, is that short bio for General Smith, and then we're rolling. So General Tammy Smith grew up in Oregon and started her Army career in 1986. Smith and her wife, Tracy Hepner, who's also in the audience tonight, made history in August 2012 when Tracy promoted her to Brigadier General. Tracy was the one who pinned the, is it a star on your lapel? And that is the official sort of ceremony that, poof, you're a general. And at that point, Smith became the first gay or lesbian flag officer to serve openly in the U.S. military. And this promotion occurred less than a year after the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. General Smith has served in Afghanistan, in Panama, in Costa Rica, and plenty of years at the Pentagon as well, which is its own foreign country. Her decorations included the Legion of Merit Medal, a Bronze Star Medal, Combat Action Badge, and her senior parachutist wings. I love that as well. General Smith also happens to hold a doctorate in management, in organizational leadership, so fairly rounded, I would say. In March of 2013, in an interview, General Smith described the significance of her promotion as saying, this is a quote, "Leadership is about being a role model, is about being a role model. I don't think I'm a role model because I'm gay. I believe I'm a role model because I adhere to Army values by being true to my authentic self." Please, one more time, welcome. Applause.
Welcome. I can't imagine how surprised it would have been as an undergrad here at Peace Studies that I would have been here with a flag officer. I know General Odierno was on the Colbert Report, and he got to shave Colbert's head. You don't get to do that here, but maybe you can teach me how to salute. Maybe you can start by that. I have no idea. What do I do?
Okay. All right.
Watch me fail. This is about to be a failure. Okay.
All right. Have to be in the position of attention.
Okay.
There you go. You got to bring your hand up like that. How's he doing, veterans?
How am I doing? Okay.
Is tilted a little? Okay. What do you think, veterans? Better? Okay.
Hooah! All right, now you have to do the Berkeley one, which is pretty simple. Okay, I'd like to start out in 2009. And you had just turned in your papers to retire from the military. And I was wondering if you can walk us up to what led you to make the decision and what happened.
Okay. Before I answer the question, because I'm a general and I'm used to being in charge, can I just please have the veterans in the audience stand up so I can see who they are? Thank you.
2009.
Yeah, 2009. I submitted my retirement papers, and my retirement was approved. And what led up to that is that I had lived my entire career under a ban on gays and lesbians being in the military. And I had been able to work that out pretty good earlier in my career. But by 2009, it started to become too much. And things were happening with equality in the nation, and I was having a very difficult time aligning my personal values now with my institutional values. I felt like they were out of alignment, and I was just having a very difficult time being in the military under those circumstances. And the reason they were out of alignment at that point is that before, as I was coming through, I placed the greatest emphasis on my service, and I was okay marginalizing myself in order to serve. But in 2004, I had met Tracy. And after I met Tracy, hiding the very best thing in my life just became too hard. And so as time went on, by 2009, it just became too hard. And I had lost hope that Don't Ask, Don't Tell would ever be repealed. And I just thought it would be best for me personally that if I couldn't end that conflict between those two value systems, that it would be best that I retire.
What does it mean to hide?
Well, to hide, I think of my experience under Don't Ask, Don't Tell is that I hid by living my life in compartments. So I had a compartment that was my military life. And within that, I had all of my military interactions, and I was fine in that life. And then I had a separate compartment, which was my other life. And that's the life where I had my gay and lesbian friends. And in those two compartments, they never crisscrossed. And so I hid by compartmentalizing myself in these ways. And where it became hard is that I wanted to share Tracy across compartments. But there was just simply no way to do that under the way that the policy was written.
And were you living together at the time?
Tracy moved. We dated long distance for a couple of years. We met on a cruise, and she lived in Cleveland, and she moved to Washington, D.C. in about 2007. So we had been together by the time I just couldn't do it anymore. We'd probably been together about 4 years at that point.
So I'm curious what it's like, because on the one hand, you have this very hidden part of your life, and Tracy, I assume it might have meant for you to hide parts of your life as well as a government employee. And at the same time, I can't help but notice that you're a woman, which is a very obvious part of your life. And how did you combine both of those? How was that like for you?
Well, when you think about the elements of diversity, it's my obvious diversity demographic is that I was a woman in the military. And I often describe that as that I have learned how to get along in an institution designed primarily for men. And I did that visibly as a woman. But at the time, no one knew this other demographic about me. So that was something I kept to myself. And I was able to lead as a woman, as many of you here have done in the institutions that you've been involved in, is that you know that you've got to be extremely confident. And in some cases, you have to be extra confident. And you have to be forceful, you have to speak up for yourself, and you have to do those sort of things. And so I did that as a woman. But the other part of me that people didn't know about, sometimes I think of it in terms of, I call it for myself, leadership from the closet. And so I'm in the closet, and that door is there, but I lead through that door, but you can't see all of me. And so it's impossible for me to bring the entire force of my leadership because that door blocks that. And that was what it felt like to hide like that.
And how was your family there for you?
Say again?
How was your family there, both your biological family, Tracy, your community? How did they support you through this?
Oh, they were very supportive. You know, my family loves Tracy, who wouldn't? And but what Don't Ask, Don't Tell did is I had to be silent. Because the thing about Don't Ask, Don't Tell, as opposed to just employment discrimination against individuals, is that for LGBT people in the workplace, you might be fired if that is discovered about you. But in the military, it was mandated that you be fired. The law required that you be fired. So you tried so hard to hide that part of yourself. And what it did is it created almost a circle of silence. Because I couldn't be out, of course, but now as my partner Tracy could not be out. And though our families were very supportive of us, they couldn't talk about to their friends. They were very proud to have somebody in the military, but they couldn't talk about this relationship. And so it was not just the service member who was impacted by this particular policy, but it was the entire family who was impacted by it.
So I'm trying to put myself in your shoes. Here you are, Don't Ask, Don't Tell hasn't been repealed, you're a woman. Are you living in constant fear of being found out, or are you saying, well, we'll let it roll and see what happens?
You live under this circumstance, you live in constant fear all the time. It's as many people who could be okay with it, and it doesn't really matter, they just are interested in the good skills that you bring to the workplace and what type of leader you are. All it takes is one person who disagrees with it and might consider it their patriotic duty to tell the military about you. So you live in this constant looking over your shoulder fear. You're very careful. You are very evasive at work, and that's part of that leading through that closet door, is that you can't be fully honest about who you are as a person. And so in that compartmentalized world that I lived, so I also had to compartmentalize off a little bit of my own authentic leadership in order to make it through that.
What was your authentic leadership? How have you tried to lead through your career?
Well, I would have to think that my leadership style is I love people. And I think that the way that you achieve good outcomes for your organization is that you do it through your people. And so, but to do that is that you have to have a very compassionate and very human approach to leadership. And so people will do all kinds of great things for your organization if you treat them with dignity and respect, if you trust their opinions, if you try and get the most out of them. And I would have to say that that is my approach, is through human interaction.
Do you think your leadership style would have been any different were it not for Don't Ask, Don't Tell?
I absolutely believe it. Now, I always had an authentic leadership in that I held true to that. My approach was that I wanted it to be about the people. But I think the difference in my leadership between what it was under the ban and what it is now is I frankly just think that I am a more effective leader now because I can bring the whole of me into that leadership experience. I don't have to worry about a slip up of language or a wrong pronoun, and I'm much more comfortable in my everyday life. And so in that comfort of authenticity, I'm able then to apply all of me into the task of leadership.
How much of Tammy do you think there is now in General Smith?
I think you got me all now.
And 2009 rolls around, and you literally put in your papers, which starts a chain of events,
Yeah.
I guess, in the big army machine.
Yeah.
And what happened?
Well, when you retire from the military, it's because nothing moves fast in the military. So you put your retirement in about a year in advance. So I had put my retirement in about a year in advance. And again, I had given up hope. I saw so many good things going on from an activist standpoint as people were raising the volume on the discussion about whether or not it should be okay to have open service. And I saw this going on, and I couldn't participate in it because it was important, but I was a soldier. I wasn't an activist, and that just simply wasn't my mission. And so what occurred is in February of 2010, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs was called to testify in front of the Senate Armed Services Committee. And he said this amazing thing, and I'll paraphrase what he said. He said is that I just can't understand how we can make our service members serve in a manner that violates their personal integrity just to be able to wear the uniform. And Tracy was she was down at that hearing, and she heard him say it in person. And I watched it on C-SPAN. And when I heard what he said, I cried. Because for the first time in my entire career, and at that point it had been about 24 years, for the first time, a senior military leader, somebody in uniform, said that my service was just as honorable as anybody else's, and that my service mattered just the same as anybody else who was serving. And I had never had that acknowledgement before. And when he said that, with that acknowledgement, what it did then is it gave me hope. Those words gave me hope. I thought, well, maybe if someone like that would say this, maybe there is hope that this repeal will take place. And so Tracy and I talked about it, and what we decided was that I would ask if my retirement could be taken back. And so I went to my boss, who was Brigadier General, and she said, well, yeah, I thought it was really dumb you're retiring anyway. But I couldn't tell her why. And so I was able to pull the retirement back. And part of my deal, though, was to volunteer to go to Afghanistan to show that I was serious about, why I wanted to continue serving. But I was able to then get the retirement rescinded.
How was it like serving in Afghanistan?
It was a good experience for me personally. I went over there as an individual augmentee. I wasn't with a combat type of unit. I was a staff officer there. And I just saw many, many amazing young leaders engaged in daily activities, and it just made me proud to be associated with the level of leadership and competence that I saw in many of our soldiers and leaders.
What was your most proud moment in Afghanistan?
Oh, my most proud moment. I'd have to say that we were able to help, and I guess my proud moment has to do with the soldiers were there. I had more of an internal focused job for our soldiers as opposed to out in the countryside working with the Afghani people. So I have to say the proudest is that when I helped the active army understand the role of the reserve and ensure that we were setting conditions that our reserve and guard members in theater were able to perform their mission because they had all of the things that they needed, that there was not any disconnect between those components as they served.
And if I can ask, what was the most difficult?
The thing that perhaps left the greatest impression on me while I was there is that there is something that occurs when there is a casualty that's called a ramp ceremony. And what we do when we have a fallen service member is that we make sure that that service member is returned with the utmost of dignity and respect, right there from theater. And what we would do is that, and unfortunately it was fairly routine, a couple of times a week, is that we would have a ceremony at the ramp of the aircraft that was going to take the transfer case of the casualty back to the United States. And we would all gather, and we would go onto the airfield at the ramp of that aircraft, and we would pay our final respects to the soldier who was leaving. And we would walk through and file through that aircraft and pause at the transfer case, say a prayer, and then move on, always thinking about the family. But that left the biggest impression upon me because, I mean, you can't get any more real than that.
Can you tell me about what it's like? Because I'm struck by the tragedy, right? Here's someone who was injured or died in war, and the family's waiting for them. And
Yeah.
when you were deployed in previous assignments, I realized, would Tracy have been able to be there? Well, was it lonely? How was it like dealing with both of those worlds?
Well, it was, at the time I was deployed, of course, even though I had hope, Don't Ask, Don't Tell was still in place. And I mean, we know of situations, we know people who were injured and returned. And the thing was, because you had to stay so far under the radar screen, a lot of times a soldier would not risk identifying their partner on the notification paperwork. And so there would be times when the individual would find out about the injury or that they were wounded in action through a family member. And that was dependent upon whether or not that individual partner had a good relationship with the family. In my case, should I have had any instance like that, we had the good relationship, and my father, I know, would have called Tracy. But I don't think that was the case perhaps for all. And you're right, that family support is so important when you're downrange and when you're serving, just to know that they're taking care of things back home and that you've got somebody you can count on.
I'm wondering this conversation about being the only. So I'm Israeli, I grew up in Texas, so I'm often the only, but it doesn't really matter. What's it like, regardless of whether the military's role is to be in the forefront of social change or responding to social change? I'm looking around, there's probably people here who next year will be in consulting or in banking in very large organizations and probably want to try to change these organizations from the inside out. What's that like? Both trying to be dutiful and also trying to change the organization and being activists, but also being professional.
Yeah, it's one of the things that's different for me now is that, what'd you call me? I'm all of Tammy now. You know,
you seem like it.
Yeah, so I'm as Court said, I feel fully present in that. But I don't believe myself to be an activist. But I do believe that I am an advocate. And one of the things that I try to do in each of the demographics that I represent, so here we've got women, we've got veterans, and we've got the LGBT community, is that I think it's important for leaders to be visible. And so I am comfortable talking on any of those topics because I think showing up and being visible is the first step to being an advocate. Showing up and being visible is what defies the stereotypes that other people define you by. And when you show up and you are present, the stereotypes are defied.
How do you do that? Because you're wearing a uniform, you're a flag officer, you speak in an official capacity somewhat, and at the same time, you have your own thoughts. And how do you balance those?
Well, many of my thoughts are actually pretty well aligned with what the military's thoughts are. I mean, when I had this disconnect, my values are the Army values. And so when I had this disconnect, I mean, that's where they came apart. But I don't find it hard in my current capacity because I personally am aligned with what are the Army values. In the Army, we do have a respect for diversity. And we're one of the most integrated workforces, perhaps, of any organization in terms of our diversity. So I feel like going into this, I'm pretty aligned with my organization.
So to be honest, I'm so struck by your resilience and your attitude. And I'm curious, looking back in your life, who is the family member or individual in your life that you think really helped you become who you are today?
Well, I would take it all the way back to my parents. So I'm from a little town in Oakland, Oregon, and so I grew up in the regular small town way. And my parents were both active in their community. Oakland, Oregon, it's got about 1,000 people. My mom took a turn at being mayor, then my dad was mayor.
I was mayor too for a couple years.
My friends say, so when are you going to retire from the Army and come back and be the mayor? But I really think that my resilience comes from the example that my parents set about community service and service to something other than to yourself. And when you live a life where you are dedicated to serving others, your resiliency comes from you want to do the best thing that you can externally. And it becomes less about you, and your life becomes more about what you want to do as a part of your service.
I'm really struck that every time I've been working with the military for the last 5 years or so, and I'm struck by how many similarities there are between my Berkeley Peace Studies friends and my Army friends. And I'm wondering, what are the values that drive you personally? What is it about serving that draws you?
Well,
you have a cool uniform.
I've got a cool uniform. A lot of people don't choose their path, even though they think they do. So when I think about coming from that small town and how I ended up in the Army, I could have easily have ended up in peace studies. I was trying to leave my small town, and I didn't have any money for college, but I just figured that that's how you get out of your small town, is you go to college. And we didn't have the means, so I was reading my Future Farmers of America magazine, and there was a pamphlet in there that said, "No money for college? Let the Army show you how. Send for free information." And that information was an ROTC scholarship, and so I ended up in the Army as a way to improve my life. Now, had that magazine had a flyer for "No money for college, let the Berkeley Peace program show you how."
We should start recruiting.
Yeah, my life might be different, but what I took into that experience, even though I call my entry into the Army accidental, is I took my values into that experience. So I believe the core of who I am would have, wherever it was that I would have ended up in my route to getting out of that small town, so I didn't have to be mayor.
God forbid. So let's talk about us for a second, because we're all self-absorbed. What has been most surprising about your day at Berkeley here today?
Oh, boy. I tell you, I've had a great day at Berkeley. And I'm from the University of Oregon. And I think what surprised me is that, dang it, I think your campus is just as pretty as ours.
We win.
No, but I think, I'm not sure I'm surprised by it, but what I am so pleased with is the integration of the student groups that came together, and some of the integration of the student groups that have come together to do like this presentation and some other things that I participated in today. I just think that that's wonderful, and you trace that back to values. I mean, I have to believe those are some of the underlying values of Berkeley as an institution.
What do you think would surprise your average civilian about life in the Army?
I think the average civilian might be surprised that we're just as regular as everybody else. I mean, we ended up in the military for lots of different reasons. The reason people come into the military is different than the reason you stay. And many paths take you to the military, but quite often the reason people stay is because they love the people. Because the people have this shared sense of community and value and leadership. And I think that what might surprise people is just how regular we don't fit. We really aren't the conservative bastion that perhaps some believe that the military are. There's a lot of good people with consistent values. Values that I have are the same values that people who might come and work in the line of work that you have. Those values are the same, and those are what hold the people together.
So I want to get a time machine, right?
Yep.
It exists now. We'll step in it.
Okay.
If there could be one experience you could relive in your life, what would it be?
Well, I know you want a serious answer, but
I just want a fun one.
yeah, okay. Well,
How about the funnest one and the most meaningful one? You can do a pentagon answer. You can give me 2 answers.
There we go. I have something I would redo again. Is I kind of wish that at airborne school, on my second jump, that I would have had a tighter or more proper exit out of the aircraft. Because had I done that, I wouldn't have had all this dental work that I have, and I wouldn't have lost those teeth on my second jump. So I kind of wish I could have gotten a redo on that. I had to come out of that aircraft in a much tighter body position. So I kind of wish I would redo that.
What experience are you most looking forward to?
In the military?
And in life? In the next 10 minutes?
You know, after the experience, and like I say, I love being in the military. And after that experience, but since repeal, and since I have been able to open that closet door and not have to lead through that, I just feel like I am living the dream. Because I always loved being in the military, and I always loved being a leader in that sense. But I had to do it in that compartmentalized way. And so, you know, I know there are many things I probably could do, but I am absolutely loving being in this moment that I am in, and being a leader in the Army, especially now as we go through some times that are a little bit challenging as an institution.
What is your leadership style?
I would have to say that my leadership style is a little bit collaborative, is that I really sincerely believe that everybody in a 360 manner brings something to the table. And I know that in my line of work, I mean, it's very clear, you know, the captain is higher than the lieutenant, who's higher than the sergeant, and it's very, very strict on what the roles are. But I don't think that anybody has the best ideas. It's not based on rank. And so I have a collaborative style. I like to seek input from others, and I do that in a 360 kind of way. I can get as good an idea from someone who is junior to me as I can from somebody who is senior. And don't judge the idea from who it came from. Judge the idea on the value of the idea. And I do that, and it takes a little longer, though, to lead from that particular style.
So I have a couple questions, then I want to open it up to the audience. So start getting your gears ready. If you had the ability to change anything about the Army and its relation to civilian sector, what would it be?
One of the things that I wish could be different, and we're trying to move that way, perhaps this conversation is an example of it, is as we are an all-volunteer Army. And so in an all-volunteer Army, you're dependent upon people who have a propensity to serve. And I came in for my economic reason that I described. But what we are finding as a trend is that people who have a propensity to serve in the military, there's a demographic that is going on with that it's moving out of certain regions of our country. And so there's perhaps less of a propensity to serve in the military if you're from the Northeast than say you're from Texas. But as an all-volunteer Army, we have to draw from the volunteers as they come to us. And so one thing that I would like for the Army, and we're doing some outreach to do this, is that I want my Army to be made up of individuals from all demographics and from all parts of our country and from all types of background. And that's what I think we will have the strongest Army when we have the broadest recruiting pool.
Anybody want to sign up? And I guess the last question I have is, what are you most optimistic about right now?
Oh, I have a lot of things to be optimistic about. I just think that personally, I feel good about where I am in my service and in my ability to lead. I'm very optimistic about perhaps in the future having the opportunity to command at the general officer level and to lead soldiers in a different type of way Right now I'm a staff officer, and though all the things that I do are important to soldiers because policies impact soldiers, is that I'm optimistic about that there will come a time when I have the opportunity to move into a command position and to apply my leadership at this level as a commander.
So let's open it up to you guys, and we want to hear from you.
Just a way that we'll choreograph this, just because we're taping this, and so there really is a little bit of discipline around it, is that if you have a question, please step to the microphone. There's one up top, right in the middle, and then one down here. And often running, I'll ask if any of these, the one thing that you and I talked about right before we opened was vulnerability and the role of that. And so you don't have to answer that now, but just I think that would be worth weaving into one of your answers.
Hey, General Smith, thank you so much for being here. Say two questions. The first one is, you talked about, and Professor Worthington talked about, look, the military has been around for 200 and something years.
Yeah.
You were the first general to ever come out. I have to imagine that there were some superiors, other people who perhaps have higher rank than you that may not have appreciated the lifestyle or what's an ally. What was that experience like, and how did you sort of influence them after you came out?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, great question. I was promoted Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed in September of 2011, and then my promotion occurred in August of 2012, but I knew about it in May. And so one of the first things that I did, well, first of all, Tracy and I had to decide, so how do you want to do this? Should we be out? And we decided there was no reason not to. It had been repealed. We weren't ashamed of who we were. And it would actually be almost in a sense a disservice to the people who worked so hard to repeal to continue to live like that. So I followed one of the first rules that you all know in business, and that is never surprise your boss. And so I went to my supervisor and said, on my promotion, probably because I'm going to have Tracy promote me, and because Tracy's going to promote me, probably people are going to figure out that I'm in a same-sex relationship and that we're married. And so what I did is I helped the institution. I gave them time to respond to it. And it was very positive, actually. And I didn't get a great deal of pushback. Again, there was no reason that it shouldn't be that way. But I can tell you that personally, I was afraid. Because after 25 years of living a certain way, I had conditioned myself that it just shouldn't be that way. Even though I was fine with our relationship, I had a bit of what I would think of as internalized homophobia. And so I was thinking about all of the bad things that were going to happen, even though it was the right thing to do. And how I got through that mostly was through Tracy. And Tracy helped me, she was there for me, she was strong for me. And even though I was scared moving into this, we knew it was the right thing, and we moved forward, and we did it anyway. And the Army was very supportive in this. Thank you.
General Smith? My question is actually, it's referring to my friend Sheila. Okay. She's actually openly gay. She is actually going to government policy. She just graduated, I think last year or the year before that. I forget. I'm a little bit nervous, so I forget the year. I was just wondering, I really want to show her this videotaping afterwards. I just have a question for you, maybe one or the other. What would you really like to change, or what do you think is still left to change in the Army or the government that you'd like to see? Or if you have any advice for her, that would be great. Okay.
First out, shout out, hey Sheila. One of the things that I think is going well in terms of change, and we've already started down this path, is the gender integration and the ability for women to serve in any capacity in the military, and there not be gender barriers in that. And we've moved forward in the military doing that now. And I think that is as that moves forward, we're going to have a better military for that. And I say that I had my own experience in 1994 with this. And in 1994, there was a combat exclusion rule that was opened up a little bit, and there were more jobs that were opened up to women at that time. And I had the opportunity to go to a combat training center as an observer controller. Now, in 1993 or 4, I didn't even know that this was significant. I just showed up and looked around, and once again, I was the only woman, and which wasn't that unusual. But what it did for me is that it wasn't so much the job that had opened up for me that was important. It was that I was exposed to the men who were in combat arms in this job. And so I learned from them by my exposure to them, things that I never would have learned had I stayed in the track that women were limited to at the time that I came in. So I think that the gender integration is a very positive thing on the horizon, for my personal opinion.
Thank you.
I think you're up first, and then you in the yellow t-shirt. We'll have plenty of time for both.
So thank you again. This has been fascinating. I'm a full-time student in the MBA program, and a second year. And we have just had a class come in, the class of 2016, taking the percentage of women in class from our 28 to a first 43%.
Wow, that's
and
wonderful.
we are very, very excited about this. And what struck me about your story is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, your mom was mayor first?
I have to think maybe she was. I think my mom was mayor first, yeah.
I have to ask, has that and the generalization of that, your mom as a leader in the house, how has that impacted your course of action?
No, that's a great question. And, and it's something you don't think much about your mom, until like later. And I lost her in 2009. But as I have reflected on this, I have to say that looking back now, my mom was a tremendous role model for me. She worked, and full time in our small little town. It's walked down to the bank and was a bank teller, and my dad was the policeman. It was just a very Mayberry type of growing up. And but I would have to, as I look back, I realized that many of the things that, in terms of my values, my approach, my compassion with people, I think that I am modeling my mother's approach to what I saw her doing in our small community there and her activities. So thank you.
So along the same
Thanks.
lines, you're a trailblazer, right? And what would you suggest? You're not old enough to be anyone's mom here, but if you were, what advice would you give any woman entering the workforce, or anyone who's LGBT entering the workforce?
Externally, a lot of times stereotypes cause people to hold other people back because of what they believe about that particular group. And what I learned from my internalized homophobia is sometimes our own stereotypes of ourselves will hold ourselves back. And so the advice that I would give to young women entering the workforce is don't be held back by your own stereotype of what a woman in the workforce is supposed to be. That all those doors are open to you, and the thing that will hold you back first is your self-comment about, well, I don't know, because women don't normally go into that. There's only 28% of women at the school. I shouldn't do that. And now we're up to, what would you say, it was 47% or something like that. And so is to not believe the stereotypes about yourself that society puts on a particular demographic.
It's really an honor to get to hear you talk to us, General Smith. I just got out of the Air Force, and one of the things that I heard a lot while I was in the military and has been written a lot is the growing divide between the civilian side and the military side. And since there's a significant amount of people here that are hoping to start their own businesses one day, what advice would you give to us on this side of things to make that transition, especially as we are making people leave the military in numbers we haven't seen in a very, very long time?
Yeah, so the civil-military divide, as we talk about it from my perspective, of course, is that just the America not really understanding veterans and the role that they play in terms of our national security. And on our side, we're almost feeling as if we're taken for granted. in a way. And so within this divide, the advice that I would give you going in as business leaders is to engage with your veterans in your communities, is that you're going to have tremendous opportunity to bring veterans into the workforce. And not everybody's going to have an MBA. I mean, there's going to be many people who leave the military who are very dedicated blue-collar type workers, but you need those individuals in your workforce. So I would encourage you to engage from an employer perspective with those veterans. And in that, you'll do kind of like what you're doing here. You're going to cross-pollinate those populations by ensuring that there are veterans present in your workforce and in the things that you're doing in your community outreach projects, including veterans in those. So I think that would be an approach.
Along those lines, what is there anything that we can do as a community in this room to help you, and to both you and the work that you're doing, and you and the Army Reserves, as students, as parts of the community?
Yeah, well, I think reaching out goes in two directions. So is that, I mean, there's some wonderful things going on in terms of the veterans initiatives that you all are doing. Is that, I mean, you folks in this room are skilled. I mean, you really bring something to the table. And so I think that the outreach with veteran service organizations that are already performing services for our veteran population is that you've got great skills that you can bring as volunteers or members of those veteran service organizations. And so I just would encourage the members to learn more about them and find a place where your skill set, your interest lines up with where there might be a veteran need in the community. You don't have to save the world.
Yeah, we do.
Just one or two veterans.
Well, thank you. Go ahead. Let's do last question.
So I just have a quick question. General Smith, you talked about how your leadership abilities changed once you were able to bring your full self to work. What advice would you have for us, as a lot of us are going to, in the next couple of years, go on to lead some of the bigger and more influential companies in the world? What advice would you give us in terms of how to lead teams and how to create that sort of environment that would help someone like you and the rest of us bring our whole selves to work?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And it goes back to, I sincerely believe that a leader has to be vulnerable. And to be vulnerable, you have to put a little bit of yourself out there. But in that vulnerability is where I think that people see that you are truly authentic. I feel like in some ways I made myself vulnerable by our decision to go ahead with the promotion and to let the military know that I was married, and to make that part of it. I had to be vulnerable to do that. And I think that from a human interaction, because leadership is a contact sport, it's a human-to-human interaction. And I think that by putting yourself in a vulnerable position, letting your people know something about you that perhaps isn't even easy to talk about, is that is a way that you bridge some trust in that. And I think that's a very important part, and it's been part of my evolving leadership as I have opened up that closet door and no longer have to lead through that particular barrier.
So we have our last question, if you don't mind standing up.
My question is about you mentioned that your leadership style is more collaborative. Can you give us some insights about how you do to convince your team to work on tasks that they don't adhere to or they don't really like?
It's like, I don't like your facts, change them. I think that a couple of things about collaborative leadership from my perspective is that when we think of leaders, we think of them as being decisive. Is that we know you're a good leader because you'll make a decision. It's easy to decide. It's not as easy to make a good decision. And so I think that sometimes what we do is that we confuse the urgency of the decision with the urgency of the person who's wanting the decision. And one of the things that you have to do as a leader is that you have to, as you go through your decision-making cycle, is that you have to actually decide, is this a decision I need to make right now, just to be decisive? Or is it something that we need to have more information on? And I believe that my collaborative leadership style is what I do is I take my teams through a process of iterative type of decision making where I ask more questions. But the way that I set the stage for that is that I let my team know what my decision style is. And I tell them right up front so they're not frustrated by it. Because the way that I make decisions is I see the big picture through the details. And the way that I get the details is by going through this iterative way of bringing the team back together. And I ask them questions that cause them to have to work together in a way to bring me back answers to help inform a better decision. And I can tell you, one of the things that I do now as a more senior person is a lot of times I send the team to ask and to work on, to collaborate, to bring me something back on something that I already know quite a little bit about, but I want them to go through that process. And so part of the collaborative, how you do that, is that you make sure your team understands your decision-making style, and you make sure that they understand why you're sending them back for the additional information and not making an urgent decision. I think the transparency that you have with your team about what your style is helps them respond to that particular style. And that a little of that goes back to the vulnerability too, is I'm saying this is my style. And your style might be different, that's okay. This is mine, and so when I ask questions and ask you to come back and work together in a certain way, you understand. We're doing this because General Smith, that's the way she will make her decision. And they get to a decision. It's just I put them through that iterative process.
Talking about iterations, I'm just so moved by how meaningful it is for us to be in this room having this conversation, and how we weren't able to do this conversation 5 years ago. And it makes me optimistic about the bridges that we can build moving forward. So I'm so glad that you're here, and I'm hoping that you come back. There's a lot to take away. So thank you for making this trip.
I appreciated being here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, General Smith, and thank you all for coming. This is a we creation, to have you come and to have you come. We're all exploring leadership together as human beings. Thank you.
I appreciate the opportunity. So here, I'd like to make sure.
Thank you so much. Thank you.